Thank you for joining me for another conversation. Quick hits. I would like to talk about how men and women are allowed to show up differently emotionally in the professional space. Wayne, do you want to jump in first?
Sure. The immediate thought is that in a professional space, the bar for what emotion is allowed is so low in terms of you can't cross this threshold or else. And so just that thought in and of itself is going, yeah, the idea of going into a professional setting immediately says we must mute everything, and how that is just generate gender biased, thinking, yeah, I have that privilege of having been indoctrinated from the beginning that no, you just don't do that. So yes, I think even when I've had outbursts that people have glossed over it, and while I may not have, the external is, oh well, whatever, had a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm immediately going to the general levels of what sorts of acceptance we do. But yes, the gender piece is a whole nother layer that I'm still unpacking.
Yeah. I was in a professional meeting once and I was being very vehement about something because we had a problem that wasn't being handled. This was in my corporate career before I became a coach. And one of the men in the room actually asked me, "Is it your time of the month? Are you angry?" Which made it worse. Like I was infuriated. You would never ask a man that. Why is it okay to ask women
I
that?
have asked if someone has eaten recently, which got a similar response. So
Lena, what do you
Hmm.
think about how men
Well,
and women emotionally show up?
for one thing, I think emotionally we all are allowed to be happy
Mm.
and to show happiness, to be joyous. But when it comes to more negative feelings, I think there is a gender difference or differences. So it's more okay to be angry than to be sad or scared. And for men, it's more okay to be angry than it's, in my opinion, for women to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the thing about also in our upbringing, many of us have learned to canalize our angerness or anger into tears,
Mm.
which is absolutely not appropriate in most workplaces. So although I could be really angry, it will show up as being sad.
Yes. James, do you have
I
thoughts?
absolutely, and I found what Lena said there like really powerful, in the difference between the way men and women are socialized to experience and display negative emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I spent many years teaching in schools, and when boys became loud or violent or punched lockers or smashed something, people would rally around them, even though that was an enormous display of emotion, and say, "Oh, as Wayne said earlier, that person's having a bad day, or this child like needs our support right now." Were a girl to do the same thing, parents would be ringing, social media messages would be flying everywhere, and in the workspace, as you mentioned, Robyn, there's then negative associations and connotations attached to that.
Mm-hmm.
A man can be held up as forthright and direct, whereas a woman can then be held as pushy or bossy for exactly the same behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And on a scientific point, something that I like to bring up when times of the month and periods and tension are mentioned, the change in hormones that creates the testosterone dominance that leads to those sorts of moods actually brings a woman's sort of frame of mind and moods more in line with a male set of moods, which I
Yep.
think is the biggest indicator that this situation is unfair that you could ever hope to find.
Yeah, exactly. I knew you were going to go there. I'm so glad that you did because that is absolutely true. And so another question I want to bring up is, do we think that women are still held accountable for male emotions in the corporate space? I know I was brought up that way, had to unlearn that behavior. Do you think that that still happens?
Looking into my memory now, yeah, when I was working for a company or corporation, yeah, that was often the case.
What about you
Just
guys? Have
to-
you experienced
yeah.
that male privilege that way?
I have seen people take on that emotional load for other people. And it's typically the women are the ones who are now, let's go manage the relationship, even though the men are the ones that lost their composure in the moment.
Mm.
And that is definitely a layer of that privilege that I'm seeing, that the men don't have to. They'll assume that the other people will or they won't. And they don't necessarily have to care because of that weird dynamic that happens in. And thinking through some of the women I've worked with, the ones who've been the most successful, ironically, are the ones who have acted the most like men and have had the most pushback against that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And just the behaviors that, if it was the man in the suit, then no one blinks twice. They just think that this person's getting ahead. Whereas, oh no, that's coming from a woman. That's totally unacceptable.
I find that particularly interesting because that then feeds into what we view as corporate behavior, or what we view as like the behavior of leaders. Here in the UK, women have been marginalized in loads of areas of society, but you take, for instance, politics, we've had very few female heads of state, but the ones that we have been forced in numerous ways to show a lot of very male behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of, it seems we excuse or we permiss those behaviors, as you were saying, that male privilege, Robyn. And if the men aren't having to pick up the tab for emotional outbursts, there's only one gender left in the room to do that.
Right. So knowing this, I feel like this is common knowledge, and maybe I'm just because I'm steeped in this kind of world where I work with leaders who are aware. I mean, people don't hire a coach if they're not self-aware at a certain level. We know this. We know that this happens. How do we change it in our interactions? How do we make it better, where women are allowed to show up and men are responsible for taking responsibility for their own emotions?
I think there's still lots to do in awareness.
Mm.
And also, I'd like to say this is the other side of it. But for men to show up as vulnerable, and which is not allowed nowadays. That's our privilege. We can do that, whereas men cannot.
We can, but it damages our professional image to do so.
Yeah, well, to some
All
extent.
the way around, both genders.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was where I was headed, is this is a systemic, we're rewarding bad behavior in both genders. And I suspect that if we stop that and stop saying, oh, that ideal leader is the alpha in the room, and we actually engage with more success models than just that one, I suspect that it will narrow that gap.
And I think if we stop looking at gender as so binary, which is a whole separate conversation, but if we stop looking at it like, I've been told many times that, well, you act like a man because I'm strong and I have opinions and I'm willing to state them. And, a man who might be a little more passive, oh, you're acting like a girl, which is a whole separate insult, using the word girl. So I think that we need to stop looking at it as human nature and men behave this way and women behave that way, and create this kind of space where everybody gets to show up as themselves, and we all kind of deal with that. We all take responsibility for ourselves. Do you guys have anything to add to that real quickly?
Yeah, I do. There's even a bonus for you if you work in a team or if you're a leader, to opening up and displaying emotion and being vulnerable. Because when we share with others, there's a release of oxytocin in both our own brain and in the listener's brain. So you're developing trust and building a relationship. Then when you need to rely on that person to work with you or help you on something, you are going to get a better result than if you just shouted at them. So like, by demonstrating that vulnerability and bringing people in, we can build stronger teams.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. That's our 10 minutes. Great conversation. So much more we could get into. We could have a whole webinar for an hour on it. So thanks so much for stepping into this stream with me, and I appreciate it. We'll do it again real soon. Have a good rest of your day.